Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into this biblical mystery, and it just might kind of rock your world. I mean, it's got
Yeah.
everything: a hidden grave, a powerful archangel, and like this epic battle with Satan over, well, the body of one of the most important figures in the whole Old Testament.
Yeah, you got it. We're talking Moses. Turns out, his story, it doesn't end with the parting of the Red Sea or, even receiving the Ten Commandments, right?
Yeah.
There's this really interesting postscript, and it all revolves around what happens to his body after he dies. You can find this story in the book of Jude.
Oh, okay. This is where it gets really interesting for me. You think that after leading the Israelites for 40 years, Moses would have at least gotten to set foot in the promised land.
Well, he did get a glimpse of it at least, right?
Yeah.
From Mount Nebo. But yeah, because of something he did, disobeyed God. God told him he couldn't enter. The book of Deuteronomy tells us that he died there at 120 years old.
Hmm.
And get this, he was still full of vigor. Even his eyesight was still perfect. And then God himself buried Moses in a secret location.
So wait, hold on. We don't know where Moses is actually buried.
Nope. Deuteronomy 34.6, it's crystal clear on that. No one knows. No one to this day knows where Moses is buried. And that's where things take a really, really interesting turn. Because centuries later, the New Testament, the book of Jude, it mentions this strange event, a dispute between, well, the Archangel Michael and Satan over Moses' body.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on a second. A dispute. Wait, like an argument
Yeah,
between an angel and the devil.
exactly. And it's only mentioned in this one verse, Jude 1.9, which makes it even more mysterious, right?
Yeah.
Like, why were they even fighting over Moses' body? What was so important about his remains?
I've read that passage so many times and I never really even stopped to think about what it means. I always just figured it was, just a minor squabble, but if Satan was involved, it couldn't have been anything trivial, right?
Right. Yeah, this wasn't like some, theological footnote. The main theory is that Satan, well, he wanted to use Moses' body for like his own twisted purposes. You see, Moses was more than just a leader to the Israelites. I mean, they revered him, almost like a demigod.
Right.
And so imagine if his burial site, like if people knew where it would have been a magnet for, well, let's just call it misplaced devotion.
Okay, yeah. So maybe a shrine, like a pilgrimage site where people would go to worship Moses.
Exactly. And knowing the Israelites' history, their constant struggle with idolatry, it's not hard to see how Satan could have exploited that, turned Moses' tomb into a focal point for idol worship, diverting their devotion away from the one true God. It would have been a massive, massive blow to God's plan.
Wow. I never even considered that before. It's like Satan was trying to corrupt the legacy of Moses and then use that to lead people astray. So was Michael basically acting as a spiritual bodyguard,
Yeah.
protecting Moses's body and by extension protecting the Israelites' faith.
That's the idea. It really highlights Michael's role as a warrior angel, a protector of Israel. Daniel 10.21 actually calls him the guardian of your nation. We often think of angels as these messengers or, these gentle beings, but Michael is depicted as this powerful force to be reckoned with.
Which makes you wonder, what did this clash between Michael and Satan actually even look like, right? I mean, was it some epic showdown? Swords clashing, lightning bolts flying? It's not really clear in Jude.
Yeah, definitely makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Even though he's so powerful, Michael doesn't, overstep his boundaries. He doesn't try to, judge or rebuke Satan directly. Instead, he says, "The Lord rebuke you."
Oh, wow. It's like he's saying, hey, this isn't even my fight. I answer to a higher authority.
Exactly. Even in the middle of this, confrontation, Michael shows incredible humility. He recognizes God's ultimate authority and just submits to his will. That's a powerful lesson for us all, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. It's a reminder that no matter how much we know or how powerful we think we are, we're still subject to God.
And I think it speaks to the seriousness of idolatry.
Right.
Think about it. God goes through all this trouble to hide Moses' tomb, and then he sends Michael, a powerful archangel, to guard it. This tells us something about how seriously God views idolatry. He desires pure, undivided worship.
It's like, the ultimate thou shalt not. You shall not put anything before God. And it makes you think about all the different ways idolatry can happen. We might not be bowing down to golden calves anymore, but are there things in our lives that we've put above God? Our jobs, our possessions, the things we really, really want.
That's a great question to think about. And I think this story, it challenges us to examine our own hearts. Are we really giving God our undivided devotion, or are we allowing other things to take his place?
Okay, so we've got a powerful archangel, A really cunning adversary and a hidden grieve at the center of this mystery. But there's something else that's really sticking with me. This dispute wasn't just about Moses' body, right? It was about something much bigger.
You're right. It was a battle for the hearts and minds of the Israelites, a battle for their faith. And it gives us a glimpse into the reality of spiritual warfare. This unseen world where good and evil are always clashing. Makes you wonder, right? Like, what other battles are being fought that we don't even know about?
It's a little unsettling, to be honest, but also kind of exciting. Like there's this whole other dimension to reality that we usually just take for granted. But it's there, and it matters.
Absolutely. And while we might not be wrestling with Satan over the body of a prophet, we all face spiritual battles in our own lives. The choices we make, the thoughts we have, the things we prioritize, these are all battlegrounds.
So how do we even begin to understand this unseen world of spiritual warfare? What does it even look like? How do we, actually fight these battles?
Those are great questions. And to answer them, I think we need to go a little deeper. We need to understand the true nature of spiritual warfare itself.
All right, let's do it. We're just getting started, and I feel like my understanding of angels and demons and like the unseen world, it's already being challenged.
That's what the deep dive is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, there's a lot more to uncover.
Okay, so you're saying that even though, we don't see angels fighting demons every day, we're still part of this cosmic battle between good and evil.
Yeah, exactly. It's just uh, more subtle, more internal, I guess you could say. Think of it like this. The battleground, it's often our own hearts and minds. The weapons are the choices we make, the thoughts we, dwell on, the things we prioritize.
So it's less about fighting with, swords and more about just making the right choices.
It's about, you know, aligning ourselves with God's will. Remember what Paul says in Ephesians 6. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. It's a pretty, vivid picture, right?
It definitely suggests that there's more going on than we can see. But how does Michael's restraint, when he's facing Satan, how does that fit into all of this?
I think it's a powerful example of how we should approach spiritual warfare. I mean, we might be tempted to fight fire with fire,
Right.
right? To rely on our own strength or our own cunning. But Michael, he shows us a different way. He defers to God, to God's authority. He trusts in God's power to rebuke and overcome evil.
That makes sense. But, okay, wouldn't God have known that this could happen, this whole idolatry thing with Moses' body? Why not just tell everyone where he's buried and make it clear that Moses was just a man, a servant of God, not a God himself?
That's a good question. A really, fascinating question. And it gets to the heart of God's relationship with us, with humanity. God often lets us, exercise our free will, even if it means we might make mistakes. He doesn't force us to obey. So maybe by hiding Moses' burial place, God was, giving the Israelites a chance to show their faithfulness, to choose to worship him alone.
So it was like a test of their loyalty.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. In a way, yes. And it really highlights the tension between God's sovereignty and human free will. It's a mystery that theologians have been trying to figure out for centuries.
Okay, so maybe God was allowing for this possibility of idolatry to see, how the Israelites would respond, but you have to admit, it's a little ironic, isn't it? I mean, these are the same people who saw the Red Sea part, the manna from heaven, all these miracles, and they were still struggling with idolatry. You'd think they would learn their lesson by then.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it just shows you how strong the pull of idolatry is, It's a temptation that's like built into human nature. We're always searching for something to fill that void, something to give us meaning and security. And sometimes, well, we just look in the wrong places.
So this whole dispute, it wasn't really about a burial site at all. It was about the Israelites and how they kept, misplacing their worship, right? And maybe, maybe that's a struggle we still face today. I mean, we might not be bowing down to statues or anything, but what are the things we're tempted to put before God in our lives?
That's the big question, isn't it? What are the modern day idols that we need to watch out for? Are we putting too much emphasis on, I don't know, our careers, our possessions, our social status? Are we letting those things tell us what we're worth, dictate our choices?
It's funny you should say that. This whole conversation about idolatry, it's making me think about how easy it is to get caught up in the daily grind. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm so focused on my to-do list and achieving my goals that I don't know, sometimes I forget about, my relationship with God. It's like I'm constantly fighting these subtle forms of idolatry without even realizing it.
I think we can all relate to that. I mean, we live in a world that's constantly screaming for our attention, our time, our energy. And it's easy to get swept away, to lose sight of what's important.
So how do we guard against that? How do we make sure we're not falling into that trap, the idolatry trap?
It starts with just, being aware. We need to be honest with ourselves about the things that are, competing for our attention,
Hmm.
the things that are pulling us away from God. Once we see those potential idols, we can start to shift our focus back to God.
And maybe that means making some tough choices, saying no to things, putting our
Yeah.
phones down, making space in our lives for prayer, for reflection.
Exactly. It's about creating those boundaries, setting priorities. It's about choosing to align ourselves with God's will, even if it means maybe giving up some of our own comfort or our ambition. Remember, true freedom, it comes from surrendering to God, not from clinging to our own desires.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this ancient story about Moses' body, it connects to the struggles we all face today. But there's still something that's, I don't know, it's bugging me. If spiritual warfare is, like you said, if it's so subtle, so internal, how do we even know we're fighting it? What are the signs? And how do we know if we're winning or losing?
Those are great questions. And I think to answer them, we need to understand spiritual discernment.
Spiritual discernment. What exactly is that?
Think of it like a spiritual radar. It's the ability to tell the difference between God's voice and all the other voices, the world, the flesh, and the enemy. It's the ability to see what's truly good and what's just pretending to be good.
So how do we develop this radar? Is it something we're born with, or is it something we have to learn?
I think it's a bit of both. We all have the capacity for spiritual discernment, but it needs to be cultivated. It grows as we spend time in God's Word, in prayer, and in fellowship with other believers. The more we, immerse ourselves in God's presence, the more attuned we become to His voice.
So it's like a muscle that gets stronger the more you use it.
Yeah, exactly. And as we develop this spiritual discernment, we'll start to see the signs of spiritual warfare. We'll notice when we're being tempted,
Yeah.
tempted to compromise, to make choices that lead us away from God. We'll feel a sense of unease when we're around things that are contrary to God's truth.
And that's where the real battle begins, right? Choosing to resist those temptations, to stand firm in our beliefs.
Absolutely. And that's where the power of the Holy Spirit comes in. We can't fight these battles on our own. We need God's grace, His power to overcome. Remember what Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Okay, so we need to be connected to God, to be rooted in Him so we can actually fight these battles. But what about the winning or losing part? How do we know if we're actually making progress?
It's not always about these, dramatic victories or defeats. Sometimes it's about those small steps forward. It's about choosing to obey,
Yeah.
even when it's hard. It's about surrendering our will to God. And as we do that, we'll start to see the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control.
Those qualities, they sound a lot more appealing than what the world is offering. But I have to admit, sometimes it feels like the bad guys are winning. We see so much conflict, so much pain and injustice in the world. It can be, I don't know, it can be discouraging.
I get that. I really do. But we need to remember that this battle, we've already won it. Christ defeated death and sin on the cross. And even though, we still experience sin in this broken world, we know that in the end, we win. We have that assurance.
So we have to keep our eyes on the prize, on the eternal perspective.
Exactly. And we need to remember that God is, He's working. Even in the middle of chaos and suffering, He's redeeming, He's restoring, and He's making all things new. And we get to be a part of that. We get to partner with Him in that work.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a little more hopeful, a little more empowered. This whole conversation about spiritual warfare, it's been really eye-opening. But I am curious, what about those Jewish traditions and folklore you mentioned before? How do they fit into this?
Ah, yeah. The hiddenness of Moses. It adds another layer to this whole story. In Jewish tradition, there's this belief that Moses, well, he didn't actually die. He ascended to heaven, alive.
Wait, hold on. So if his body wasn't even there, what were Michael and Satan fighting over?
That's where the mystery gets even deeper. Some scholars, They think they were fighting over Moses's, spiritual legacy,
Mm.
his authority as God's prophet, or maybe even like a symbolic representation of his leadership. It's as if the battle wasn't just about his, physical remains, but about like the very essence of Moses's role in God's plan.
So it was like a battle for the soul of a nation, a battle for, I don't know, for who would control the narrative, who would have the final say.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of spiritual leadership. We need people who are willing to, to stand up for what's right, to guide others to God, to protect the truth from being, distorted or corrupted.
And who are willing to submit to God even when they're facing powerful opposition, just like Michael.
Exactly. True leadership, it's not about power or control. It's about humility, service, and unwavering faith in God. It's about pointing people to the one true source of authority and hope.
This whole deep dive has really challenged how I understand angels and demons and spiritual warfare. It's not as simple as I thought it was. There's so much more to it, so much nuance.
That's the beauty of really digging deep into Scripture. We find these layers of meaning that we might have missed before. And as we do that, our faith grows, our understanding grows, and we're better equipped to deal with the complexities of life.
I couldn't agree more. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the signs of spiritual warfare. He talked about, temptation and unease. But are there any other red flags we should watch out for? What are some of the ways this battle, might show up in our lives? The more subtle ways, I mean.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think sometimes we can be so focused on the the big dramatic stuff that we miss the more subtle signs.
Oh, absolutely. It's like you're trying to fight something you can't even see. You never know where the attack's going to come from. Exactly. So what are like some of those sneakier tactics, the ones we should be looking out for?
Well, one thing's that feeling of discouragement or despair. The enemy, he loves to get in your head, whispering these lies, telling you you're not good enough, that your efforts are pointless, that God's abandoned you.
It's like he's trying to drain you, take away all your energy to fight.
Exactly. He wants you to give up.
Yeah.
To just, throw in the towel. So if you ever feel like, I don't know, overwhelmed by negativity, hopeless, that's a sign. You might be under attack.
Okay, so discouragement, that's one red flag. What else?
Another thing is division. The enemy loves to, stir up trouble between believers, create conflict. He knows that a house divided against itself can't stand, right?
So, like, little arguments, misunderstandings, things that get blown out of proportion. That could be signs of spiritual warfare.
They could be, yeah. It's important to remember that we're all on the same team here. We're fighting a common enemy. So if you find yourself, getting annoyed with other believers, if you're quick to judge or criticize, maybe take a step back. Ask yourself if there's something else going on, something deeper.
That's good advice. It's easy to get caught up in those little things and forget about what's really important.
It is, yeah. And the enemy knows that. He wants us distracted, so busy fighting each other that we forget who the real enemy is.
So we've got discouragement, division, anything else?
One more thing, a lack of passion. For God, I mean. When you feel that fire start to, dwindle, when you lose your enthusiasm for prayer, for worship, for sharing your faith, that's a sign that something's not right.
It's like we're, I don't know, drifting away from God, getting too comfortable in our faith.
Right. And that makes us, vulnerable. Think of it like a fortress. When the guards are alert and the walls are strong, well, the enemy can't get in. But when the guards are asleep and the walls are crumbling, it's much easier for the enemy to attack.
Wow. That's a powerful image. So we need to, stay alert, keep our defenses up. But how do we actually do that? I mean, it's easy to say be on guard, but what does that look like, day to day?
Well, it means, putting God first, spending time in the Word, praying, being with other believers. Those are the things that feed our souls, the things that keep that spiritual fire burning.
Okay, so it's like we're filling up our tanks with, spiritual fuel.
Exactly. And just like a car can't run on empty, we can't fight these battles if we're running on fumes.
This whole conversation is making me realize that, spiritual warfare, it's a lot more complicated than I thought. It's not just about, demons and stuff. It's about the choices we make every day, the battles we fight inside ourselves, and how we choose to live in this world.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about being intentional, about making those choices, the ones that line up with God's will, and remembering that, We're not alone in this. We have God and a whole army of angels fighting with us.
That reminds me of the story we started with, Michael and Satan fighting over Moses' body. It reminds us that even, the greatest people in our faith, they can still be attacked.
That's right. And it also reminds us that God is always there. He's always there to protect us, to fight for us,
Yeah.
even when we don't, even when we don't see it.
So even though this whole spiritual warfare thing can be a little, scary, I actually feel encouraged. I'm starting to see how understanding it can help us live better lives more
Yeah.
victoriously.
I'm glad to hear that because, knowledge is power. And the more we know about the enemy and how he works, the better we can resist.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some, I don't know, some key things our listeners should remember about this whole dispute over Moses's body and what it means for us today?
Well, I think the first thing is, just remembering that spiritual warfare, it's real. It's not just some idea, it's something we all face as believers
Yeah.
every day.
And second, it shows us how important it is to, recognize and resist idolatry, whether it's worshiping something, physical or putting something else before God. Idolatry is dangerous. It can really lead us astray.
Absolutely. And third, it shows us the power of humility,
Mm.
of submitting to God, just like Michael did when he was facing Satan. We need to remember that our strength, it comes from God, not ourselves.
This has been such an amazing exploration. We've really, uncovered so much about this passage in the Bible and what it means for us.
It's amazing how much wisdom and insight we can find, even in the smallest details.
Yeah. It reminds us that the Bible is alive. It's full of truth that's just as relevant today as it was, thousands of years ago.
And it shows us how important it is to really dig deep into these stories, to ask questions, to really wrestle with what they mean.
So, to everyone listening, what are your thoughts? What stands out to you about this story? What questions do you have? We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.